Hi, and welcome to Wait, Hold Up, What? I'm your host, Dawn Hanks. In today's episode, we talk to Mia Marie Perisotto. Mia has over 20 years of coaching, mentoring, and leadership experience and has walked alongside dozens of leaders as they've enhanced their leadership skill set. She's an advocate for women and their stories. She's a storyteller who uses personal experiences from career development, industry changes, and even mental wellness with her clients. Her stories are personal, but they resonate with so many people. In a world where everyone has a personal brand, the goal of our chat was to talk about what happens when someone doesn't like your personal brand. But soon our conversation evolved and we started talking about navigating otherness in all sorts of different spaces, both professional and personal, and the strength that it takes to believe in your power when others are constantly trying to make you believe that power is a weakness. It is a frank conversation that highlights Mia's incredible fortitude and resilience. I'm so delighted to be a witness to her story and to share it with you. Please help me welcome Mia Marie Perisotto. How many times have you heard the words workplace and culture used together and found yourself rolling your eyes at the thought? Believe me, I'm with you. I'll be honest, as I record this, I just rolled my eyes. That's because the word culture has become homogenized in such a way that they actually had us believing ping pong tables and pizza were symbolic of a good place to work. COVID changed that. Remote work was a success in the eyes of many, and as such, our ideas of what constitutes a good workplace culture have changed, and it boils down to one crucial element: equity. Now, don't you roll your eyes again on me. It's true. The expectation of employees is that they have a work environment and culture that works for them, regardless of who they are. No more cookie cutter swag and Pizza Hut deliveries, mandatory after hours, happy hours, and all of the other things they do to make us feel like we're a family. This is especially true for women. Remote work gave many more hours in the day, the flexibility to feel more productive and present, and a choice in how and what style of work is best for who they are and what they do. This is at the core of what equity means, because the old way was made for one group of people. And this is where Eliminate Girl Hate comes in. We help create safe and equitable spaces for girls and women, and we help the companies that employ them be more profitable in the process. Not rolling your eyes anymore, are you? Check us out at eliminategirlhate.com. Use code WAITHOLDUPWHAT in your contact form for a free consultation call and see how we can help you and your business. Have you ever dreamed of writing a book? I know I have. Or maybe, also like me, you've started a manuscript. Maybe you've started 10 and you've just never finished it, or never let anybody else read it, or never thought you could publish it. Wherever you are in the process, Jim Woods would like to help. Jim's a writer just like you, but he's also a coach who loves helping writers bring their books into the world and make them a reality. If you are like me, sometimes you need that push, a supportive but demanding cohort along the way to put your stories out into the world and keep you on track. Jim Woods is that cohort. Visit jimwoodswrites.com and click the Let's Chat button. Mention our podcast for a free clarity call and get your story out into the world because we need it. My guest today is Mia, and I am not even going to attempt to say your last name for fear that I say it wrong, and I forgot to ask you how to say it all of these years. So tell me your name and tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my name now is Mia Marie Perisotto, but when you met me, it was a very long name that I will not share, but my last name was pronounced Punzalan. And a lot of the times, if you see my name, I do Mia Marie. And the reason why I do that is because no one could ever pronounce my last name. So Mia Marie was 10 times easier than to try to figure out how do you say that last name. So that's kind of where that comes in. And then honestly, I have just been someone who has had a passion for people, creating moments that are not just aha moments when you're learning, but teaching moments, learning moments, and then experiences where people can feel confident and comfortable to grow in, whether they're going to do something new in life, they're someone that is seeking something better. I like being the conduit of doing that. And a lot of my career from when I started off in retail, as everyone does in high school, and they move on in their career, has just really been centered around that. And it wasn't something that I really knew about myself. I'm pretty much an introvert. I'm someone that didn't like public speaking to the point of if I were to fail a class, it would have been speech and communications. If not for teachers that understood that it was just a fear and I needed to conquer that fear, they were kinder with me. And I fell into speaking and teaching and learning how to own space because of these great teachers. And it was something that I think for me, even when you met me, Dawn, in like 2013, has just been part of like my fighting spirit. Like, I want to give up, but I'm not going to. Just a little bit more, see how far I can get. And then let me distract myself with learning about you or having a great conversation about a favorite meal. Something that it wasn't just an experience that we tried to do this hike. I didn't think I was having fun because I couldn't keep up with everybody, but instead I made a lifelong friend out of it.
Yeah, so I'm going to back up for the listeners and tell them a little bit about how we know each other. So we met professionally, theoretically, at an event through Oakley in which you were working with, I believe, Sunglass Hut at the time, right?
That's correct. Yep.
And we did an event around our women's program in downtown LA
Yes.
at, I think, a W or something like
Yes.
that.
Actually, yes.
Okay, look at this memory
Look at
11
you.
years later.
That's perfect for fun.
I know. And we would do these events for a women's program that really tried to bring women in.
Mhm.
And I guess, I don't know that this is what was said in a meeting room, but create a safe space for women to see the possibilities of what they could do. At one point in time, our tagline was made for more. And while we could talk about the way it was marketed, the way that I really saw it, especially in the channel I worked in that was optical, was that as women, we are consistently comparing ourselves to others and consistently, I used to say, if we walk a mile, it's not enough because the neighbor walked 3 miles. So now we're walking 3 miles, but then that's not enough because we didn't run it. And then that's not enough because it's not 5 miles or, and so on and so on, right? It's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I really loved these events that we did because there were a lot of women at them that were like, I'm not sure I can do that, or I definitely can't do that. And when we met, we were doing a hike in the Hollywood Hills, which for those that don't live on the West Coast or kind of know that, that's up where the Hollywood sign is, the Griffith Observatory, and it's pretty hilly. It can be treacherous if you're somebody who maybe doesn't do those things. It was a hard hike and a very hard hike. And some of the people that were with us were extreme athletes. I'll just call it what it is. Others of us, maybe not so much. Myself, for sure, in that category. And as we were hiking, we just started talking and ended up finishing that hike together. And it was I don't know, in some ways, maybe a transformative experience. And I'm not really sure how to explain that, but that was how we met. And we live in different countries and at the time, different parts of this country, but we have had a connection since that moment. And it was an hour. Couldn't have been more than that. I wouldn't have survived a longer hike than that.
I wouldn't either.
But it was just a moment between you, myself, and another colleague. I don't know. Maybe you have better words than I do because clearly they're failing me right now. But that's sort of how we met.
I feel like that time in my life was already a transitional period for me outside of that program. I was in a space where I professionally went from being very valued or felt very valued to someone that was just shy. So similar to your example earlier of, I just did the whole mile, but the person next to me did 3 and then I did 3. So then I was doing 6 and I was trying to run and it just never seemed enough. And I remember when I got invited to that, I was so surprised. And I said, really? And I remember the person that was in our region for South Florida. And he was like, why would you think that you wouldn't be invited? And I said, I'm just not really, he's like, listen, you're an amazing ambassador for the brand. He's like, you are inspirational. People love you. Like, I think you're going to enjoy it. Like, you should definitely be open to the experience. And his name was Jared. He was our, I guess, territory manager at that time for Sunglass Huts. And he was like, no, I got you. So one of the things that Jared had said was like, just enjoy the time. And I remember going through these events and I was enjoying it. And I think it was like day 2 was the hike.
I
And
think
with
so.
day 2, I was like, okay, I looked at the hike. I was like, I can do everything. And then we got to everything until that part. And I went, I don't know if I can do this. And I didn't say it out loud to anyone. It was just one of those things where the initial fear was everyone is going to beat me. Everyone's going to get there. And I don't know if I can do this. And I said, well, I guess I have to try. And I think I was trying to be like in my yes era. And I was there and I remember walking and hiking. And as we gravitated towards each other, we started to get to know each other. I think what cemented that memory for me was just how authentic you were and how we were sharing real experiences. And I hadn't had that in so long where it felt not work related. It didn't feel like you were trying to figure out what my intentions were for anything. It was just generally 2, 3 people chugging along this hike, trying to make it. And you helped keep me motivated by saying, like, you don't have to give up. Like, if you want to stop, I'll stop with you. And I just remember going, okay, but just a little bit more. Is that okay? And you're like, yeah. And then we would talk about like your favorite Filipino dish, or would talk about how he liked living in Miami and what did you like about being on the West Coast, and all of these different random things that I would forget that a little bit was a lot more. And as women, when you're trying to hype up women, I actually think of that example. I use that example of I wasn't competing against you. I wasn't trying to beat you to the summit. You weren't trying to beat me to the summit. In fact, it was the very opposite. We were just trying to cheer each other on to see how far we could get. When we got to the summit, we were like, oh my God, we made it. It was just, that is the part of uplifting and being next to women and not competing that I loved. And I really took that to heart when I went home. And it is fundamentally why I've always appreciated your message, why I have always wanted to keep in contact and was so happy that you also wanted to keep in contact, because I just thought that in that time in my life where I needed that, I got it. And from I just did not expect that I would get that from that weekend. That was not, I don't know what I thought about I was going to get from that weekend. And I got something 10 times more. And I have friendship from that weekend that has lasted this entire time through different life journeys, career path changes, life changes, country changes, COVID, like everything. And it's just such a beautiful memory for me. I think that's the best that I can describe it. And I know it's good, but I could say more, but that's how important that moment was and how important your friendship and our relationship is. So.
But you're going to make me cry, and we haven't even really started the episode yet.
I was thinking about that. My eyes are already watering in general, but I was like, oh, yes. If I cry now.
I think, thank you for sharing that with me, first of all, because I think oftentimes those it's the small moments that end up being transformative a lot of the times. And it's hard to put them into words, but we also very rarely share them with the people that we have them with. And it's one of the things, I think COVID brought it out more in me, but it's telling people, hey, this really meant something, or this, let me tell you why that impacted me, or why you impacted me, things like that. I think it's nice to hear that. And I think it's really nice when women share it, because there is so much telling us that we're not enough, or that our brand doesn't align with something, right? I had an experience where a friend of mine, you meet people, you become friends with them at work. And a friend of mine at work had said, yeah, I just heard something crazy about you. And I'm like, oh, great. What could it be? And basically what it was is that someone didn't want me working on their team. And the reason was that they didn't like my personal brand. And so they didn't believe that I could help with what they were working out from a brand perspective. I remember being so crushed and thinking, my personal brand, what does that even mean? Because now everybody's a brand, right? And my feelings were very, very hurt. And I carried it with me for a really long time. And you and I have talked about this briefly, but this idea that in the world we live in today, it's not enough to say that we're different, right? Because we are all unique, right? We're all little snowflakes in a good way, not in this political way that snowflakes are being used. We all have this unique thing that we bring to the table. And it used to be like, they're fine, but maybe I'm not going to hang out with them all the time. But now it is supposed to be representative of every single thing you do. And there's so much pressure in that.
Yeah.
And so as we go in and delve into that topic, because this is what we said we wanted to talk about, when is the first time that you realized you had a brand?
The very
or
first.
other people viewed you as a brand, I guess I should say.
Those are two different moments, but I know the first one of when I realized I was a brand in general was when I was working for this spa company. This is 2006, 2007. And it was my first, for all intents and purposes, big adult job. It's my big girl job. I interviewed for it. It's what moved me from Chicago to Florida. And I was ready to put my stake in the ground and say, this is who I am. I didn't know what my full brand would be yet. I just knew that I was the good Midwestern girl that was eager to learn, a hard worker, comes from a good background. I just knew that those were staples that I had. And when I had joined this company, amazing women around me. It was a spa company from France, super intelligent. And I was probably like in the first 3 months. You know how you're in a probationary period of a company for the first months. So I was there and I had what was viewed as several missteps. And the context for that is I worked for the retail side and there was the spa side. But as part of my onboarding, I learned from both areas. I got to meet people on the spa side as well as the retail side. My mentor and my manager at the time, who was not a hiring manager, but like the team manager, was the person who got me as part of the team, like told me to interview, like thought I would be amazing. And I said, okay. And I remember being in my onboarding event in Chicago. It was the third day. It had snowed. I wore like the best suit that I had because I was told you have to wear suits all day, even though not everybody had to. And I had made the mistake, and I put that in quotes, mistake, of getting to know the spa director, who was technically the opposite of my retail director, who was my big boss. And saying, I have all these ideas of how I'd like to train accounts and include different marketing. Are there marketing assets that you have in the spa that I can leave that are teachable to some of the people? I said, as someone who had studied aesthetics myself, for estheticians, like I could teach them something because this was a very holistic brand. It was something that, while now is more prevalent using essential oils and holistic remedies, in 2006, 2007, not really. People were in their Clinique era of life where everything was sterile, not really oil-based. You ran from anything like that. And that feedback had been given to my director. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was being cataloged of all the times that I went outside of my team, or I thought outside of the box, or I asked too many questions, or I didn't ask my specific director enough questions. And it became this brand of myself that I was too eager, that I didn't understand that I was supposed to stay in my proverbial lane, and that I wasn't quite what she thought she had hired. She was like, I thought you were too good to be true in the beginning. And I was like, oh, why? And she said, you were effective at communicating. You had real life examples. I just thought maybe you were a really good interviewer. And this is part of the downfall in my brain of how I didn't want to be perceived as someone too eager, a hard worker, think outside of the box. It's actually the first time I actually put myself into a box that someone else forced on me. And my manager, my team manager at the time, was just like, oh yeah, like you're on so-and-so's bad side. And I said, why? They're like, even though you're pulling numbers, you're not pulling numbers as fast. I was like, I've been in role for 6 weeks. This is not exactly easy. You don't want me to use these other tools. You're mad at me for reaching outside. Well, she should have just asked me. And I said, but I did. And that wasn't the answer that I had wanted. I wanted additional items. Why am I not allowed to reach out to the greater team? Well, that's because we are retail, they're spa, there's no connection. And I went, okay. And I said, can I reach out to the other account executives like myself? No. Okay. Can I ask you what you did? She goes, I gave you a blueprint of what I did. I said, but that only worked in Chicago. I have Washington, D.C., all of Texas, South Florida, like all these other accounts that are way different. What did the person do before you? There wasn't somebody really in that role before you. And I remember as I got frustrated, it was probably the second time I ever cried at work. And my boss was calling to see if I was at the place that I was supposed to be. Like I felt so belittled and undervalued for something that I thought was a good trait, for being collaborative, ironically, for the stuff I'm celebrated for now. Be collaborative, thinking outside of the box, reaching out to build bridges, creating experiences, all the things that now as an adult, 20 years later, congratulations, kudos, that's amazing. But when I heard that, and I remember just sitting there and taking all of this feedback in, I wanted nothing to do but just be like everybody else. And I had just overcame that feeling from like childhood trauma type, where I wasn't like everybody else that I grew up. Because if you know Chicago, it's 50% Italian, 50% Irish. I obviously am not in that area. So it was one of those things where I had just gotten over that. I had just gotten comfortable with who I am, what I know I bring to the table, and the opportunity of a lifetime through my hard work to be told that everything that made me amazing is not what they were looking for. They were second guessing if they made the right hire. It was devastating.
Yeah.
Like it encompassed me for years. It affected my leadership for 5-6 years after that. And I desperately tried to fit inside the box that my boss wanted me to fit in, because I thought that was the only way that I would be seen as valuable.
So I'm going to back that up a little bit. So you grew up in Chicago. What part of Chicago?
North Side by Wrigleyville.
Okay. Nice area.
Very nice area.
Or fun area, I should say.
Yeah.
And you're Filipino?
I am Filipino American, first generation.
I love that. And so not a lot of Filipinos around you as you grew up?
I was up until high school. So, let me say, up until 8th grade, there were 7 of us out of a class of 100.
Okay. More than I would have expected, to be honest with you.
That was the anomaly. It was more.
Mm-hmm. And was it being Filipino in an Italian and Irish community that made you feel other? Was it being a girl that made you feel other? Obviously, your first generation or whatnot spoke English. It wasn't like language was a barrier. Mm-hmm. So what was at the heart of feeling other as you were younger?
Being Filipino. So there was a lot of vitriol as a child that I felt from people that were supposed to be safe spaces, like a teacher, who would say racial slurs and make comments when I was in pre-K and kindergarten. And thankfully, I had good friends, because actually when I was in kindergarten, I was one of 2 Asian people. And I had good friends that had actually stood up for me for whatever that looked like, right? You're 4 or 5. Someone says, teacher put me in the corner, but Mia didn't do it. Parental rage ensues, has a conversation. The teacher gets let go for that type of stuff because it's not to the standards of the Montessori school. And that was only the first time. There was several times after that, not from that school, but then from people in the neighborhood. My aunt was a hairdresser, was part of a salon in our neighborhood. And very eclectic salon for the most part. Lots of different ethnicities were there. The owner was Greek. You had one of the workers there that was Jewish of like Israeli descent. Then there was Jewish American. There was my aunt who's Filipino. You had another Greek person. So it was a very eclectic type of a vibe where you would not think there would be any hint of racism, especially with how much they loved my aunt. But one of her clients used to tell me that, oh, you're Asian, you're just never going to get anywhere. You know that, right? No one's going to want to learn from you. You're not going to be successful. I don't even know why you're here. And I sat there and I said, well, you do get your hair done for my aunt. So she goes, yeah, that's all you're good for. And I said, oh, for professional services that make you look presentable and make you feel good. And I said, well, if that's what I'm good for, then I look forward to the opportunity to make people feel better about themselves when they leave than when they come in.
So where does that come from?
Pardon?
So where does that come from? And what I mean by that is you're young in that situation and there is introvert, extrovert, irregardless, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I used irregardless correctly in that statement, but whatever. Roll with me, people. Being young, no matter how you identify, it's often hard to have ownership of your confidence and your steadfastness in what you believe, right?
Right.
So that example that you give represents a lot of confidence to be able to say, okay, you are implying that's all I'm good for, and that there's something to be ashamed of about doing that. Wherein these are really respectable jobs that are helping people. And at a young age, you clearly understood that. So where did that come from?
I think a culmination of my parents, my aunt who lived with us and the one who was the hairstylist, and just stories that my mom always said is that you always have to fight for things that you believe in. My mom was a very strong-willed and strong-minded person. And when you're a kid, you don't necessarily see that as a good thing, that is like this obstacle to get forward. But there's a lot of smaller things that she instilled in me that I, like her fighting spirit, that's not something that I learn. That's just something that I naturally have because I've seen her do it and I do it. And I remember, despite how other things happened in my life, the one thing that at least my mom always stuck to is whatever it is that you want to do, you can do it. You don't have to listen to how other people tell you no. They're just projecting whatever they're feeling on you, and that you don't have to take that. She goes, you don't even have to do that when I am, but I'm your mother, so you're going to. And I was like, okay. And what's funny is that while I did have the confidence to say something like that, something like that is also are things that got me in trouble because my mom used to say that I had a very sassy mouth, a very always comeback oriented. I was not the demure person that she would have been growing up. I was more rough around the edges, whatever that looked like to her, because she's basing it off of how she grew up in the 50s. It's a way different lifestyle in the 90s, 80s and 90s that you're sitting there going, that's a different standard, but the message is the same. And while I did tell this person that whole feeling, my mom also then said, you should also still respect your elders. Next time, just let that go. Don't let them get to you. And a lot of her messaging was always stand up for yourself, but also don't let them get to you.
So it's like a silent protest from her.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you're introverted, your way of protest was
not silent.
Yeah, it was louder.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that urge to protest loudly has gotten stronger as you have aged? Has it had like peaks and valleys?
So I think it's more of a peak and valley ebb and flow type. I definitely am more cognizant of the battles that I'm choosing to fight. Life has taught me which ones to fight for a little bit harder, which ones you maneuver a little bit differently so that you can still influence, and others just stay away from. It's not worth. You're not going to get what you want out of it. I've had to learn when and how to adapt to those situations because of childhood trauma or work trauma. And a lot of the things that now as my personality is, even though I'm still very introverted, but I can present as extroverted, if there is something that I consider an injustice, if there is something that I can circle back on and say, that was not right, and I know that's not right, the very strong-willed Capricorn, bullheaded person in me will come out. And it's the fight to see justice for it, like that things are not misconstrued, misrepresented, missaid, misspoken for. I like to make sure that everything is very clear. And if there are people or moments where that is not the right answer to go about it, you have to think differently. I've been in a better place where I can take a step back, reassess, and go back from it from a different angle and perspective. It's just a matter of how willing they are to listen to what I have to say. And then that also provokes the secondary response of then the bullheadedness coming back out of the sassy mouth and all that fun stuff. So it really is something that ebbs and flows. And I've learned to temper more as I got older, because I just told you that I was in my mid-20s and I got told that being who you are sucks. Okay. And as much as I wanted to fight it, as much as I wanted to say all of these things, that time in my life was a time that I didn't know how. I wasn't empowered to fight for myself. I wasn't surrounded by people that would fight for me.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt you, but I want to ask, it's two parts. One is, I'm going to make an assumption that this sense of judiciousness and this sense of fairness, it shone more when it was in service of other people than of yourself.
Correct.
Okay. And is that because you didn't think you deserved it?
A little bit, actually.
Okay.
I think I was always, I know. I was conditioned, and my mom is rolling in her grave listening to this somewhere, I'm sure. I was conditioned to put myself last in that scenario. Most of the time, just always think about how other people see you, how you're presenting, how everything else. So if you think all the different types of feedback that have worn me down, of course, because you're negating any positive that I have had for myself, and you're reminding me, in a sense, that I shouldn't put myself out there. I shouldn't want more for myself. I shouldn't defend myself because it doesn't look nice. It's not what should have been there. And a lot of that moment that I was telling you is the first time someone saw me as a brand, as negative. It's every fear that I ever had growing up of who I shouldn't be.
I think some of that is cultural, because I'm not Filipino, bear with me, but I do have a lot of friends, and I grew up with I lived with a Filipino family. I worked for a Filipino company for a while, and there is such a sense of collective in the community, right? Over self. So do you think culturally that's part of what raised
100%.
you, and then you're going into a white world that
100%.
says, ugh. Okay.
100%. I was raised in the culture to be mindful, aware of others first, self second. And usually when you talk to, I won't generalize. When you think about my experience as a Filipino American, the Filipino side of me culturally is raised one way. The American side of me wants to respond a different way. It's amazing to have better clarity now as an adult that the environment that I grew up in, the environment that I was nurtured in, the cultural impact of the environment that I was a part of, from the people that my parents put us into for community, like there were community centers, we were part of all these different groups, to the things that we participated in my school, which we didn't participate a lot in. There was a lot of self-loathing in that.
Around your ethnicity?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hated being different to the point, like, this is a real story. When I remember the story that I told you and I alluded to earlier, where I had a teacher tell me that I wasn't going to amount to anything, that I was bad, etc. It was also around the same time that I ran home to my parents and I said, "Am I white?" And my parents were like, why are you asking that? And I was crying and I said, "Am I white? I want to have blonde hair. I want to have blue eyes. I don't want to be Filipino." And I was 5. So my parents were taken aback by that. And I think that's where my mom's like, you need to not take that stance for it, and it doesn't reflect you, comes in. But then when you think about meals or experiences where your experience is different, it built up a lot of hate for who I was ethnically.
Yeah.
I was culturally this other group that nobody else fully understood. I didn't quite fit in. And honestly, like if I'm really honest, I didn't even find myself as to be able to fully embrace that side of me until I left all of it. Like until I moved to Florida and I wasn't around it as much. I didn't have my family. And I found myself wanting to be a part of that same community that I shunned and did not want a part of. And I knew more than most people thought I did. I spoke the language. I did all these things. I loved my mom's family. I loved being in the Philippines. But if you took me out of the Philippines and you put me back in America, America did not want me as how I saw it. That's how I grew up.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be that. I just wanted to be American and whatever that included. I always dropped the Filipino part of it. I was American.
If young Mia has a vision in her head, right? Is it simply being white that would have made you quote unquote American? Or was it something else?
The interest that I took of being white was to assimilate into what I was around, which was Irish and Italian.
Mm.
So if I considered myself American, I didn't associate it with having English background or ancestry. I associated it with trying to be Irish or trying to be Italian, which the Italian part is somewhat comical for me because my dad lived in Italy for a while. He has Italian foster parents who treat me like their granddaughter. I spoke Italian for a while growing up, and it was still different. It wasn't American. I needed to be Italian American or Irish American. I wanted the assimilation of the blonde hair and blue eyes. I wanted to Irish step dance. That was all like the whole thing. Like there was so much pride in it, Celtic pride. And I loved learning about their cultures. I loved the friends that I did have that took me in and taught me about their cultures. But that to me was, especially because if you read it in textbooks, that felt American to me. It felt foreign to not have that type of representation or to not learn about the plight of Asian people or the Filipinos in the States or how all I knew was the US liberated the Philippines from Spain. Well, but how?
Yeah.
Like you're never taught these different things. You don't see it in the television. Like you didn't really see Asian people. It wasn't necessarily Southeast Asians like myself. So you just sit there and be like, oh, okay.
And back then, Filipino culture wasn't in the lexicon. So I'm assuming, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe people thought you were Hispanic instead of Asian.
They did.
Yeah, that had a lot.
I got a lot of "Are you mixed?" growing up because people didn't recognize that Filipinos come. Like my parents had a book called "The 50 Faces of the Filipinos" of how we have these different tendencies from Spanish looking to what we call the people from the mountains of Negros, where we have some of them are like African ancestry. And when people got lost on ships or just looking tanner, you look at my parents. My dad had really curly, kinky, wavy hair, dark skin. He used to be mistaken for, I think he told me Dominican. A lot of the people thought he was like Dominican.
Yeah.
And then you see my mom, super pale skin. She had her like soft, like almond eyes. And they would know that she was Asian, but they wouldn't guess Filipino. And when you looked at me as a kid, my hair was like, it's a little bit lighter than what this is overall. Like in the sunlight, it was a lot lighter. My eyes had this bluish green tint around the rims. So people were like, are you half? And I'm like, no, full Filipino. Even to now, people still ask. I'm like, I feel like I look pretty Filipino. Why are you? Like, I'm like, okay, no, I'm full. And a lot of people are surprised by that. So I think there's still this mold that we don't fit into, at least as Southeast Asians, right? Like you have people from Indonesia, Malaysia, myself, parts of Taiwan, because we're close to that. Even other countries, when you're going further into the East, that don't quite look like the norm of what people assume that they look like. And that also plays into sometimes, like some of my friends we just wanted to be like everybody else.
And do you think, like, that's childhood, and in a lot of ways it makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing necessarily, but especially then, I think our demographics as in the US, right,
Mhm.
are showing so much more diversity now than ever before. And what that diversity looks like. I remember it, gosh, I probably was like 20, 21 or something like that. I
Mhm.
went to Florida for the first time. And it was Disney World. It was for a Taekwondo tournament that my younger brother was in. And I had been to Disneyland, right?
Mhm.
But Disney World was so different from
So
Disneyland.
different. Mhm.
And it was about the people. So I don't even know how to verbalize this. My family is interracial, right?
Mhm.
And so when we go places or when we went places in Oregon back then, that
Mhm.
was very othered.
Mhm.
And I just remember going to Disney World and being like, my eyes just wide open because, yes, I saw Black people, but it was like 400 different kinds of Black people. And I
Mhm.
saw Hispanic people and Asian people, but it was, you knew
Yep.
this was dozens and 20s and 30s of different countries that these people came from. It was such a quote unquote melting pot. It was unlike anything that I had ever experienced, right? And I think that
Mhm.
is slightly different now,
Mhm.
as the demographics of this country are changing. But as a kid, there is this assimilation because you want to make friends and it's all about, I like this and I like this. Me too. We're friends, right? We're best
Yep.
friends forever. But as an adult, and even teens, I think there's
Mhm.
this like little hill that happens. People start to come into some of what their own is, and they may still apologize for it.
Yep.
But it's, if this is what I love, this is what I love, even if I do it in secret.
Yes.
And then as an adult, in the workplace, you have an assimilation component
Mhm.
for sure. You want
Mhm.
to get promoted, you want to do all of those things, but it is so much more not hidden, but not talked about,
Yeah,
right?
it's not at the top of mind, but it's an underlying.
You
It's the
feel it.
unspoken rule. Yeah, it's like
Yes.
the unspoken rule. Mhm.
But everybody would be like, oh, no, we're not like that.
Mm.
Because it's an HR thing
Yep.
at the heart of it. So as you traverse your career or as you
Mhm.
started to traverse a career, did you still feel other? And if you did, was it related to being Filipino or was it something different?
So there were times that I still felt othered, but I can actually tell you and this is probably the only reason why I super loved Miami. I didn't like living in Florida. Florida was just not my vibe. I never fully quite could assimilate there, even though that's where I found out a little bit more about who I am.
Mm,
Rather than being othered because I started in Florida working for the spa company where I did feel like I was the only person on my team that wasn't white. I was the only person. Was one of the very few people that were of Asian descent and American at the same time. So I had a lot of different things where it just wasn't quite the same. Still, people I had friends. I got along with them. It just didn't click fully. And when it clicked fully, where I was able to feel like I wasn't an other, even though technically I was an other, was when I was in Miami.
mm.
And I, to this day, celebrate that team with so much love that I worked with at Sunglass Hut. I have a lot of friends from there still that I still keep in contact. And even though our languages were different, I was in a lot of Spanish speaking areas where it was Cuban, Colombian, all different types of Spanish. And I'm learning this whole new cultural nuance based off of several like different countries and how they perceive things. And I don't speak the language. I spoke a little Spanish. I could understand a lot more. And it never felt like I didn't belong because
What what dialect do you speak for Filipino?
so I speak the main language, which is Tagalog, and then I
Okay.
speak my mom's two dialects, which is Bicol and Oasnan. So they're
Okay.
very small. They're typically the main language, which is like the one everywhere else for the Northern Island is Tagalog, and then her dialects from her provinces.
And Tagalog has a little Spanish
It
influence.
does, yes. So
Okay,
that's
yeah.
the one that has more Spanish influence. I want to say there's two or three other main languages that happen in the Philippines. One of them is
Ilocano?
Visaya, I think is the main
Yeah.
part of that language, and that's towards the southern islands. and beautiful language. I know a little bit of it. I have my good friends who are like my brothers. One of their wives is from that area. So I love listening to them talk because I'm like, please teach me how to say this in your,
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
language, because I only speak, I tell them, I speak the boring part. It's the one that kind of sounds like Spanish, could be misconstrued. I go, yours just sounds so beautiful. And I remember my sister-in-law saying, no one has ever said that they preferred to learn, Visaya versus Tagalog. Everyone wants to learn Tagalog. I'm like, everybody wants to learn Tagalog, sure. But I want to learn your language because that's what you grew up. And I would like to learn how to, because I love the food, I would love to learn how to express,
Yeah.
gratitude and learn things from your part of your culture, because I think that's important.
But
And
because Tagalog has some Spanish roots and because just Filipino in general, did you feel more akin to the Spanish community in
a
Miami?
little bit, because a lot of it was more culturally
Or-
similar.
Yeah.
So even how some of my coworkers and friends, they were like with their kids, because I was on a little bit younger than some of the demographic in my region at the time, but just the way that they would tell me stories about how their kid is growing, because it'd be like, hi, Mia, is this how this is going to be? And I'm like, no, listen, they're going to go through this rough patch. And it just seemed like we understood each other, at least culturally, even though we didn't
Yeah.
speak the same exact language, even though some
Yeah.
of the words were similar, there was an understanding there that felt genuine and real, that I call that group of people my second family.
Yeah.
I tell people, I said, the only reason why I didn't feel like I never belonged was because of these groups of people that took me in and treated me like I was a sister, a niece, a cousin, whatever. However, they treated me like family.
Yeah.
And it was probably the first time that I didn't feel the otherness as much. The
Okay.
only times I ever felt othered while I was there was because I didn't speak Spanish as fluently as others. And you had people, I worked retail, you had people expecting that you
Yeah.
spoke Spanish or that you
Yeah.
looked Spanish, so you should speak it. And I remember the first time that I had really started getting accustomed, and I think the first time I got offended, going like, why would you expect me to speak Spanish? I would never expect anyone else to speak English or Filipino. It just was weird. And I realized a lot of that had to do with my own idea of what being American was, or being here, what being there was. And I purposely cut that from my thinking, because I said, that's not helpful, one. And two, then I'm no good. I'm just like them. If
Mm.
I'm thinking that you need to speak English when you're talking to me. And I just said, I would always just say, just a little bit slower, a little bit
Yeah.
slower. I can totally help you. And it didn't feel off at that point. It felt like it was the same, even though we weren't exactly speaking the same language.
It's
So,
acceptance, right? It's that
yeah,
ability to say, hold on, my expectations should not be on you.
absolutely.
So what I'm curious about is in the Filipino culture, even
Mhm.
Filipino American culture, how does gender play into that? So did any of these feelings or maybe this ability to have a brand, build your brand, represent what you wanted to represent, were there components of it related to being a quote unquote girl or quote unquote woman, however we identify, that maybe made it harder in both spaces?
Sometimes I think a lot of the things that we don't talk about as a Filipino community, again, from my lens and my experience, is that women are more submissive, we're more quiet, we're more of the people that don't shine on their own because of somebody else. And the brand that I have built was just trying to be like my fear growing up. If you asked me what my fear was when I was 10, it would be to be misunderstood,
Mm.
that people wouldn't listen enough to what I was saying, that they would misunderstand or misinterpret what I was trying to get across.
Mm.
And a lot of that had to be with the fact that I was a woman, a female girl growing up in America, and in America with Filipino parents who believed that a woman is the one that takes all the burden but doesn't say anything, is someone who is quietly present and isn't too loud and doesn't take up too much space. that my cousins that were males who were like my brothers were allowed to play rough, to do all these things, that rules didn't apply to them, but they applied to me.
Yeah.
And to be pit against them. Like my cousins now, they're like, you were pit against us? I was like, you're so male that you didn't even see that. Yes, I was pit against you. Why aren't you like him? And how come you can't be as smart as they are? And all of these things of what I shouldn't do and what I can't do. I was never told what I could do. So the underlying message of my mom's, don't let that project anything, but she also then would do the same thing of pitting me against them. It was such a confusing time to understand who I was through their lens. I could only continue to be me the best way that I could be me. And the best way that I knew to be me was heads down, a hard worker. I will do my best to understand you and be a friend. I will listen, and I'll be the voice or the person or the thing that you need next to you to comfort or guide you, because I didn't have that.
Was there an expectation that you would have a career?
As a doctor, because
Oh,
that's what I had wanted to be. As a kid, I'd seen something. I was naturally good at sciences. I had great. People told me I was charismatic as a kid. When you're a kid, you don't know what that means, but I assume they mean I would have had good bedside manner as a doctor. And I was fascinated by medical science.
but
So
did your parents support doctor or did they try to push nurse?
no, they supported doctor.
That's amazing.
Where they didn't support was when I was so I fought really hard to get into this neuroscience program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And it wasn't a guarantee when you got into the university, but you could test into this, where it was like a straight 6-year program of undergrad testing to get into medical school, like your MCATs, all these things. So it was accelerated. The only problem was you just had no summers. That was the big thing, is you went to school year round. And I was like, okay, that wasn't my first choice. I wanted to go somewhere else. I ended up choosing that university because they had a program very similar. And I went there, and I went for a year, and someone as studious as I hated it. I'm a terrible test taker in general. I really have to study to take a test, which I don't think tests are good markers of intelligence, but that's neither here nor there. And I had 3 really terrible teachers. And when you talk about experiences of how you're trying to move forward, I decided at that point I didn't want to pursue medicine or that field further. I actually wanted to take a break from university, like a gap year, and figure out what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to go into computers. I thought I wanted to go into graphic design. I was good at both. I wasn't sure. And when you take a career away from a parent in general, like a career parent, you can solicit some type of feedback. My parents were not happy. They insisted that I continue to go to school, even if they actually still wanted me to go to that school. And I said, no. I put my foot down and I said, if I'm paying for school, because I was the one paying, I'm going to go to the community college then and try to get gen ed and do all these things. And it was one of those things where, to my parents, they failed. And they failed because I didn't follow the path that I had so vehemently wanted to be as a kid, had chosen as a child.
Because
And
it's that immigrant dream, right?
Mhm.
We're going to come to this country to give our children a better life.
Mhm.
Okay, we dreamt this together. It
Yeah.
wasn't just your dream, it was
Mhm.
the
It was
collective dream. Yeah.
And I didn't finish with my bachelor's. I ended up going into work full time. Honestly, I had to go to work to pay for school. And at that time, just based off of my age and going to school, my parents still qualified as part of my FAFSA. My mom made too much because she had 2 jobs to support everything. Like it was so many dominoes that were not in my favor that I was just like, this is just disheartening me more.
Yeah.
And I finished what I finished, and I learned a lot of different things. I learned I liked psychology, so I still liked the neuro space of the mind. And I said, I want to just grow my career in retail for right now. It was never supposed to be the path that I wound up on. It was a path that I was pleasantly surprised to be on, because it taught me more than I think I would have learned in a university setting that wasn't conducive to how I learned. That wasn't the way that I was going to blaze my trail, right? And that for my parents was difficult. My parents are both university grads. My dad has a PhD. There were so many things that it was shameful for me to not be educationally on paper where they were.
Yeah.
And
You
I see
think
that
that
now. Yeah.
helped you own, sorry. Do you think that making that choice for yourself and then moving into a line or a career of the sort that retail
Mhm.
is, do you
Mhm.
think that helped you take up space
Yeah.
or learn how to do it?
Yeah. It's one of the most pivotal times in my life where I stood my ground. I didn't stand my ground very often against my family or for things that I wanted. It was always mocked and shamed because it wasn't the normal way. I was already considered like the black sheep of my family because I was American and I thought more American than I did culturally Filipino. And honestly, saying no, this is what I'm going to do, and fighting and trying to work really hard at being good at those points in my life and my career in a retail environment, which is very difficult. You wear a lot of hats. You have to be good at being flexible and agile. Before the phrase "be flexible and agile" was a thing. Like you were that. You were the performer, you were the director, you were the producer, you were the stage guy, you were everything. And I took that space, that was the small space that was given to me every time. I took a little bit more. And every
Mm,
time I felt more confident in who I was, I took up more space.
mm,
And I influenced more and I led more to the point where people who used to doubt me, like my first manager job was at 21 at a Nordstrom. People are like, "You're the manager." I'm like, "I'm the acting manager of the floor tonight." So yes, that's me. Were people who had longer tenure that sat there and said, "This is my boss. What she says, go." Like every small step of space that I ended up taking garnered more respect for myself, of how I viewed myself and how I conducted myself. But then I realized that as I was taking up space and finally respecting myself and giving myself the grace to take up the space because I didn't know how to do that, I looked up and I realized there were other people around me that were like, yeah, take the space. That kind of solidified that path for me, that I think I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm where I should be.
Did it take
Um,
you a while to trust the people that were saying, yes, take up space?
yes. Oh my
Okay.
God, yes. I think they were all a different series of micro events, micro things that happened, micro moments, right? We had said in the beginning that it's the smaller things that are more transformative, and earning respect from them, earning respect for myself, learning to respect myself to take space, and then trusting what people are telling me are all combinations that I struggled with early. And
Mm.
still at times, I don't think anyone ever fully perfects that. If you do, please let me know how to do that. But I'm still someone that when I take space, even now as an adult, I think there's still a small part of me that goes, do I deserve it? Do I need it? Are there other people? Do they also think that I need to take this space? So there's still that question in the
Do
background.
you question it for others? So what I mean is maybe you have a team and there's a young person on your team that's struggling with taking up space and you're in there saying, do it.
Mhm.
Does that same question come in your head or do you just automatically give them the grace to do it?
I think it varies from the
Okay.
people, and I don't necessarily know what determines why it varies. I can tell you right now, there was a real example of a coworker, a colleague. She's newer into her career, early on into her career, and recently had. It's funny, we just talked about this yesterday. Recently, someone tried to mansplain her job, and it's not like she was new in her role. She was someone who's been there, and it's because this person the person who's mansplaining is trying to make a name for themselves, right? They're taking over this thing. They're drop. And I always know that you're trying to make a name for yourself when your first instinct is to drop every big name that you know in a company. And I'm like, wow, are you projecting or what? Because this dropped like 5 names that I'm like, I know have nothing to do with this. And if they will, they're going to come to me later because I just know how that's going to work. Because what you're asking is something that I would do, not what she does. And I just remember telling her, I said, no. She's like, no, I guess I should just ask. I'm really frustrated. I don't know what to say. Like, he's not listening. And I said, you need to be very clear in your words and exhortations. I remember coaching her through it and saying, take the space. And I said, I know that feels super weird and comfortable because you don't know how to. And I'm saying, in this moment, you should take the space. You know what you're doing. No one is questioning that. I said, I am not questioning that because we're co-producing something. And I said, my boss, who I have been filling in on the situation, what's happening, is not questioning your ability to drive this conversation. So there is no question. Take the space, own it, be clear and succinct, do all the different things that you know that you need to do. And I said, stand your ground. When they push, I said, know that they're pushing and trying to tell you things that they're like, I don't get it and I don't understand. Where 1 week ago, you presented why something wouldn't work based off of XYZ factor. And they were like, oh, you're right. That makes sense. No, that doesn't work. So how did that change in 1 week? I said, they're just trying to bully you because they think they're going to get what they want. In the end, she got what she wanted because she was right. And what all the posturing he did deflated because when he's like, I'm going to send it to my boss and his boss and the VP and blah, 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 blah. They were all like, we trust her. So she knows her job. And the person who's creating it, which is me, they're the experts.
Yeah.
Whatever they say goes. So he just lost his whole posturing. And it was first time for her to sit there and say, she even told me, she goes, I've never had someone sit there and back me up and continue to back me up. She goes, I didn't know that you could do that. And I said, no one did it for me as I was growing my career. I had to learn how to do that myself. And it's uncomfortable as heck. But if there was a moment I had seized it at that time, I was looking partially selfishly at a version of me where I wish someone had said, take up the space. Like scenario was a little bit different, but also the same, like the outcome would have been the same.
Yeah.
I fought for my space. It was very difficult to fight for my space. I didn't really have the backing. I didn't have someone telling me to take up the space. And here I am presented with a similar scenario 15, 16 years later. Take the space.
It's like you get a redo.
Yeah. And I'm like, if anything, I need to live by what I tell myself is that I'm here to uplift people, that I never forget where I came from because I was in her shoes. I never forget where I came from. I'm going to help you get to that next level. And there's always that, do they need me to do that? Do you want me to do that? And the permission space of it, that is also something that I learned from coaching, but I asked permission. I said, do I have your permission to provide feedback and help coach you through this moment? And that's something that I think is probably why I didn't doubt myself helping her in that moment, and why sometimes if there are times for other people that I might say you might need to learn that one on your own. And I still try to help them take the space, but I'm not as vocal or active in it because sometimes I don't have that permission, and I know we don't have that relationship for me to have that permission. And I can silently try to help you, but sometimes I feel like, especially as a mentor, you also have to have that permission that it's okay. Because if I was young and I can recognize moments in myself where I would not have been okay with someone else pushing me, I wasn't ready.
I think too, it's about, I like the concept of permission, but it's also about asking what someone needs in the moment.
Yes.
And some people want you to help solve the problem. And some people just want you to be an ear or
Correct.
a shoulder or whatever it is. And and I think that's something I can recognize in myself, is that I can continue to work on, is understanding when they need what and being able to provide based on what they need. Because I think a lot of times people who coach or who are good at coaching or mentoring, it's because they want to provide people the things they didn't have. They don't want people to feel the way that they did. And so while that is a very kind gesture and it's often about being in service of other people, if it's too much based on what we didn't get, it may not truly be in the best service of that person.
Yep.
And I can see sometimes where I have straddled that line and maybe been less effective because of that. What I wanted to ask is, do you think you have a clear sight or view of what your brand is now?
If I'm honest, I would say no, only because I think it's iterative. I know what I present at a core. Like I know what my core things are, like what I want to be remembered as. I want to be remembered as someone who creates experiences and relationships with people that help strengthen their purview or help them feel like they have finally understood what they bring to the table. I want the stories of not just myself, but stories from other women and my mom to uplift others, to give them a sense of belonging where it wasn't, where they felt like they just didn't quite fit into a box, because you don't have to fit into a box. And I think that at the very end of the day is that I take into consideration how people are feeling in that moment and what they need, which is why I do the permission piece, right? And I think everything else after that, what I'm known for, like I'm known for a lot of different things now, even in the last 6 months, it's different than how people knew me 6 months ago. And I think the core of me is the same. The base of what you get when you understand who I am, I'm still the same person you met in 2013. I just think I'm stronger and more present in the stories and the words and the experiences. And that if my brand was drilled down into anything, I would like it to be drilled down into that versus what I thought my brand was a year ago.
Are you less apologetic?
Oh, super.
And do you ultimately, as any marketer knows, right? People have to evolve. And it's when we don't that revenue stagnates, that employee retention stagnates, or we start to lose touch with our core. Maybe that's when maybe you get a little bit more depressed or a little bit disconnected from your community or your purpose. And that's because you're not allowing that evolution to happen and to build. So if somebody were to, let's say you're in an office setting and it can be you or it could be someone on your team. You heard the words, I don't like her brand. What is the advice or the pep talk you would give to yourself or the person that works for you?
I think if it was for me, because this is something that has happened a lot in the last, let's say, 5 years, is the first advice is I wouldn't take it to heart when someone says they don't like your brand. Because a lot of the times when someone says that to me, it's not that they don't like it, it's they don't understand it. They don't understand fundamentally what I'm about or why I do things. And their refusal to understand or be open to different experiences or people or how they work isn't something that I'm going to be able to control.
Yeah,
right?
You're not responsible for it.
You can dislike me. You can say that you don't like my brand, that you think I network better than you do. That sounds like a you problem, sir. That doesn't sound like a me problem. That sounds like a you problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times when I look back on those moments that I've grown from of the I don't like your brand, that was an example that happened to me. And I know I shared that with you before.
Yeah.
It's not taking to heart that they don't like my brand because they don't like me. It's knowing that they don't get it.
Yeah.
And not everyone is supposed to get it.
No.
And if I put that pressure on me that everyone has to get me and my brand, I'm going to be so disconnected, like you were saying about finding your purpose, than what I'm supposed to be doing. And my iteration in life now that I've figured for this moment in time is to share stories, to uplift, to be either the pillar of strength, the silent ear that you need and sounding off board, or the person that helps you cross that finish line, whatever that looks like. If you don't like the fact that I can do that, if you think that I'm more influential than you, if you think that my ability to connect and see patterns to create things that matter, you don't agree with, it's not to me to make you agree with that. It's
Mhm.
not on me anymore. And it took a very long time for me to say, just because you don't like that I think differently than you, or that you think I'm going to take your job, or you didn't think I was right for this position, you wanted to hire somebody else, all of these things. That's not, and you didn't give me a chance
Mhm.
show you what I was about. You just right off the bat said, I don't like it. It doesn't fit. That's not a me problem.
Yeah.
And it
Mhm.
took a very long time. And it still stings a little if I'm being honest. There are
Of
times,
course.
there are certain moments, they still sting, they still hurt. But that's not my fault. And if I'm here and I have gotten this to where I am and the success is based off of the brand that you did not like, obviously there's still something good because I made it and I
It
made it
works
out.
for someone,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And
I often say I
I,
love Baskin Robbins mint chocolate chip ice cream. Like, I could probably write poems and books and songs about Baskin Robbins ice cream. And yet, some people don't like it. They like pistachio or Jamocha almond fudge. That seems disgusting. Or spumoni. Like,
yeah, now
ugh.
no school.
So
Yeah,
if not everybody likes mint chocolate chip ice cream, not
yeah,
everybody's going to like me.
correct.
And I get it. I'm a lot, but I am not embarrassed or ashamed to be a lot,
Yeah.
right? Because I earned the space that I took because of the life that I lived
Mm-hmm.
and the situations that I endured and the
Mm-hmm.
things that I conquered. Now, that doesn't mean I am better than anybody else. It doesn't mean I'm at the top of my game, right? I still struggle with doubt and I struggle with, am I enough? I think that's the human condition,
Yeah.
especially in the world that we live in today, where we're forced to compete, where we have this really weird thing about labeling and ranking.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're this, you're inherently better. And if what I realized at a certain point is if I continued to live my life
Mm-hmm.
for that, there was an unsettledness
Yeah.
inside of me. And I got to be honest, that is one of the worst feelings ever, to be unsettled and feel like it's a panic attack, it's a anxiety attack, it's a
Yeah.
heart attack, it's so many things that fill inside of you when you
Mm-hmm.
feel unsettled. What I'm still learning, because life is a process of learning, is how to settle that.
Yeah.
And that the settling of
Finally.
that has nothing to do with anybody but me. And that's not always easy because,
Mhm.
especially if you don't trust yourself, which I struggle with. I trust myself with other people a
Yeah.
lot. I
I get
don't
that.
always
Yep.
trust myself for me. And learning how to reframe that, I think a lot of that also comes down to narratives, right?
Yes.
And about has been narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
This narrative around being other, this
Mm-hmm.
narrative around being less than, about disappointing people, right? And examine your life, which an unexamined life is pretty crazy, right?
Yes.
So when you examine your life, and you start to re-look at some of these traumas or these stories
Mm-hmm.
that maybe someone said something to you at 5 and that became the narrative of your life for the rest of your life. And it's about letting go of those narratives or about expanding them
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that person had a perception of you based on what they knew at the time. And that just like people, thoughts and beliefs and narratives evolve as well.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes it's very hard, but it's
Mm-hmm.
about letting go of that narrative and changing it, rewriting the script so that it
Yeah.
aligns with who you are now. Because we are always changing. We are always evolving. I'm not who I was yesterday. I'm not who I was last year. People that think they know you, they don't. We
No.
never truly know another human being. We only know what they allow us to
Correct.
know. And so much of what we present as humans is what we think people want to see rather than what the reality is.
Correct.
And I think as women, there's an added pressure or an added component to that because historically, it's interesting what you say about the Filipino culture and women,
Yeah.
right? And the subservient and the serving nature. I think that is such a much more shared experience than maybe we've realized. Culturally, it might look different in different spaces, but
Yeah.
that concept that we are here to serve and nurture and care and put others before ourselves is so embedded into the female experience.
Yeah.
And that leads me to what I wanted to be my last question for you.
Okay.
And that is, how do you actively put yourself first or take care of yourself and the child or the story that you created for yourself now as a grown-up woman?
So, one is I take care of my mental health. That is something that I didn't do consistently enough. I would do it and then think I'd be fine and I would get over it because I have that I understand everything syndrome. I don't need that anymore. Not the case. I definitely put my mental health first for a lot of things.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
What does putting your mental health first mean for you?
So
What does that look like?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is aside from seeing a therapist regularly and talking about it, because there are a lot of things in my life that I have to unpack because they're trigger responses of how I react, right? It's also
Preach.
doing the work to think through why. So it aligns so much so with what you had just said previously about working through your narrative and how do you reframe it, how do you expand it, or how do you take that and say that's not the narrative that I'm going to go. This is where I'm going to go. A lot of my mental health work for myself has been understanding what are the narratives that I held on to for so long? Why did I hold on to it? And are they still things that are actively changing the way that I think, react, do things? And if they are, why? And that's a lot of work to do. It is a lot of self-reflection and thought and journaling and trying to find passions that provide purpose and healing. There's a lot of things when you encompass my experience growing up. There's a lot of things that I have not healed from, which is why I learned to compartmentalize and work past it. So then the other flight of being a woman is you have to work 3, 6, 10 times harder, right? We talked about that with Miles. So why is it that I'm sitting here pouring myself into work, working 60 hours a week? What am I running? I'm running away from something and I'm trying to prove a point at the same time. Why? And unlearning that has been a journey. It has been life-changing in a way to say, you know what, I am not in the mental space. I don't have the capacity. I don't feel good to put myself first and say, I don't feel good. I had to take care of myself. I'm sorry, we're going to have to reschedule. If that was even 3 years ago, that's not something I would have said. I would have worked through a migraine that is kicking my butt and making me dizzy looking at lights.
Yeah.
I would have worked through COVID when I had caught it. There's so many things that I have started to unpack, unlearn, and do to take care of myself so that I can let go of those narratives, so that I can rewrite or expand and experience and frame it differently. The other experiences that I've had in my life where I mentioned where it still stings and it hurts, a lot of that has to do now with, do I understand? Do I need a reminder that in that point in time of my life and my career, had that specific event not happened, I wouldn't be where I am.
Yeah.
And I would not be stronger or the person that I am. I would not have grown the way that I have. And a lot of the times through childhood into adulthood, those negative experiences usually fueled me to get to the next level. feeling the type of disappointment and rejection based off of who I was fundamentally, the brand that I was presenting at that time, the person that I thought I was, and who I ended up growing into. I take those experiences that hurt, and while they still suck in my memory, I remind myself that I wouldn't have had the opportunities now. And I've not only healed a part of me, but I have then done exactly what I set out to do, is never let someone else feel that type of a sting from myself as their leader,
Mm-hmm.
or as their peer. If they're going through something and they're saying, hey, I need help. Can you help me? I have stood ground with women shoulder to shoulder to help get them through the finish line,
And
because that's something that I wish I had.
And do you think now, today,
Mm-hmm.
that being Filipino, being a woman, is part of your brand?
Yes. There are so many cultural identity stories that I have that now that I look back on my personality, the things that I fight for, the things that I want, I am not ashamed to be Filipino. That I love my culture so much. I love the people that come with it. I love the dialogue of unpacking why certain things are the way that they are, and why the American version of Filipinos and regular mainland island Filipinos, why there is a discourse. I am happy to be in those conversations. I don't feel like I shouldn't be. I don't feel like I don't want to be. I want my family. So as my family grows, like I have nieces and nephews and godchildren, I want them to learn both the good and the parts that we need to discuss further about our culture. Like, I am not ashamed of sharing my past or my history or who I am culturally, ethnically as part of those stories. And it's made me stronger, because that is something that nobody else has. And even though collectively for Filipinos and Filipino Americans, we all have stories and there might be shared experiences, there's still my lens and my view and my experience that shapes why, again, Mia is still standing here and growing and evolving and sharing stories more vocally, and trying to help people find their way through whatever it is they need to find their way.
So if you were to ascribe one word to describe yourself that makes you proud of who you are, what's the one word?
Difficult, because I'm like, I could think of 5 different words.
You and I are that way, which is why I was like, no, you only get one.
Well, I know. That's why I was like, no, she's looking for one. So hold on. I feel like it's so cliche, but I want to say authentic.
I love that.
Because experiences, feelings, journeys, whether they're mine, they're shared, authenticity is something at the heart of it.
And you're proud of that. And you know, your mom would be too.
Looking at a picture of her right now. She's right here.
Yeah. So, 100% would be too, because for all the pressures and expectations that a parent can put on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, when they see us living in our truth and they see us conquer whatever that is, the demons, the trauma, the world, right?
Yeah.
I'm about to tear out just thinking about it. There's pride in that. Yeah. And there's that, I'm not a parent, so I'm like totally projecting. But there's also that deep breath that happens that says, she's going to be all right.
Yeah.
She's good.
And
what a beautiful thing. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. It's such a beautiful thing. You know, that journey is beautiful. It's when you love somebody, that's all you can hope for them, right? And so what a beautiful place to be in. Without sounding condescending, I just want to say I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of this journey that you're on, and your commitment to making the world a better place. Like, it's really beautiful. And I did not mean to make you tear up, but I love it.
I put the tissue box closer to me because I was like,
look,
oh my God.
Right here, buddy. Right. Yeah. Always. Thank you so much. I've been saying this, I feel like, on broken record, but it is not lost on me what it takes to do something like this as a guest and to allow yourself to be vulnerable in somewhat of a public space. And I appreciate that. I'm so grateful for it. I'm humbled by it. And I just adore you in
Same.
so many ways. And excuse me, and I'm so appreciative that you took the time to do this. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
No, I feel so honored. There's 500 things I could say right now. But no, honestly, like when I look back and I think about my journey, there are clear points that you're definitely a part of it. And any project or story or anything that you do that I can support in any way, I'm always down to support. I've always been your like number one fan in the background, singing like, that's my friend. I know her. And, and
And one of these days we're going to have lumpia together.
I will make it for you.
I'm
I will make
better
it for you.
because I
Yes.
try to make it and it is not great. So
I'll show you
I'm
my
going to
mom's
hold you
recipe.
to that.
I'll show you my mom's recipe. But yeah, no, I'm so honored that you asked. I'm honored that we could share this space and have this conversation. These are conversations, you're right, we don't really talk about often. I don't get to tell you what you meant to me as often. Maybe I do, but in broken text messages.
Yeah.
And so I think this space and this ability to share these stories and commonalities and just words of wisdom and love and care is an awesome opportunity. And I'm so thankful to be a part of
I
it.
love that. And one of the words I would ascribe to you in your brand is fortitude. And just that continuous drive to be better, to learn, and not be better for anybody else but yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. And so I love you. Thank you. We will talk soon.
Yes.
And bye. Did you know that 80% of the world's purchases are influenced and made by women? Or that 90% of product development, manufacturing, and corporate leadership is led by men? I don't know about you, but that seems like some funky, disconnected math. This disconnect means large segments of the population are not getting their needs met because the products being made never even asked us what problems we needed to solve. Instead, companies use a pink it and shrink it philosophy. Not familiar? I bet you are. You know it. Take a man's product, make it smaller, paint it pink, sell it for 25% more. Then, when the products fail to make a dent in the market or to sell rapidly, they say things like, the market wasn't ready. Or, we were so sure it was going to work, I wonder what happened. And then they move on. I'm here to tell you, the market is most definitely ready. But the market is savvy. And putting some paint and saying it was designed for us is a slap in the face. We have real needs, and we're not settling for anything less than real solutions. If this sounds familiar to you and your business, then it's time to connect with Eliminate Girl Hate. We help businesses understand the lucrative consumer segment of women and how to meet their needs in authentic ways. From problem solving, product creation, marketing, and even human resource practices, we help create safe and equitable spaces for the female segment. And these safe spaces increase profit margins, employee retention, and brand loyalty along the way. It's time to start a revolution and meet your consumers where they are. It's time to eliminate girl hate. Check us out, eliminategirlhate.com, and find out how we can help your business today. We are sponsored by Epiphany Recording Studio. Creativity needs to flow freely if you want to reach that aha moment that we're all looking for. At Epiphany Recording Studio, their goal is to create space that takes full advantage of those moments. From podcast and video production to music creation, you get the support you need to create compelling stories with a competitive sound. Your ideas can flow freely because they partner with you free of judgment, ready to be vulnerable, do the work, and make your projects look and sound their best. So let Epiphany Recording Studio help you reach your artistic vision by visiting them today at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. Tell them Dawn sent you. When I think about this episode in particular and the intentions of where we started to where we ended up, I don't know, it sat with me for a really long time. Because we started with this concept of, let's talk about what happens when someone doesn't like your brand. And worse, they tell you they don't like your brand, as if that's any of our business. And then the conversation went to this idea of otherness. And when someone doesn't like our brand, it's because we're other than them, which my visceral reaction is, okay, then it's not for you. But I wanted to take a step back because it's easy for me to say that on the outside. But when that happened to me, that is not how I felt. I was like, what's wrong with my brand? How do I fix my brand? What else do I got to do? Blah, 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 right? And mine, when it comes to where that conversation went, which was more about otherness and assimilation, and specifically for Mia around race and ethnic background. I'm a white girl who's blonde and green eyes. I can't fully relate to that as it talks about race, right? But this idea of sameness and assimilation, it's so fascinating. And so I wanted to educate myself a little bit more on what it was. And I came across this description that says, assimilation is about giving up your own authentic identity in favor of someone else's identity. And boy, did that just smack me in the forehead because, ew, very prophetic, right? But by expecting forms of assimilation, we're actually asking people to give up who they are in favor of preserving the culture of those who have socially or constructed in our narrative and structure are in power. But we also have history and millennia of telling us that power is corrupt. And so what a weird concept to want to construct ourselves after, right? But assimilation, at least in, wanting to be like someone else or wanting to be normal, which I think we hear a lot. I know I have said that so many times in my life, especially as a tortured teenager. It's not because we necessarily want to lose our identity. It's because we want things to be easier. Life is hard. And everything that surrounds us in culture, it's based on a construct. And those are developed by whatever the reigning power is at the time. And depending on how deeply rooted that power is, those constructs can persist over generations and millennia. But the world changes over that time. So our constructs should change with it, right? And the ideas of what is good, bad, pure, evil, all these weird concepts that we identify ourselves based on or put value to, they should change with those times because, as the lovely and great Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better. And so if our constructs don't change with our knowledge of what is better and what is more compassionate and empathetic and kind to the world and the people around us, then we're failing as a society, as a culture, and as a people. And depending on how deeply rooted that power is, these constructs create problems for us. They don't allow for nuance or change, which means no matter who you are, to someone, somewhere, at some time, you are othered. But what happens when the perception of other changes? Or worse, what happens when other no longer exists? And instead, there's one way, one voice, one expectation. We all lose in that scenario. And we become these robotic memories of maybe what we could be, right? Think of all that we lose in that. And the boringness of that, the simplicity of that, the art that we lose, the music that we lose, the humanity that we lose. Many people talk about this current time frame as being the second golden age of television. I know, a weird segue, but I promise you, stick with me. So it's this golden age of television, right? And there's a lot of dialogue around movies actually dying as an art form or having a drop in the quality or the stories that are being told in that format. And people blame it on binging and all of these options that we have to stream and watch content. But one of the reasons that I think TV is having its moment is because of what these platforms allow us to do. With so many platforms, the demand for content is bigger than ever. And the accessibility to that content or the ease of accessibility means that you no longer have to get tens of millions of views to be considered successful. It has allowed for niche content to be created, be released, and more stories to be told, and more people telling those stories. And it means that there's something for everyone, and we get to learn and experience people in new ways. And while that's probably a pretty soft example of talking about assimilation, this is a much bigger construct and topic of conversation where people who have much more education and knowledge in the subject should be talking about above me. For the average everyday person, I want to make it relatable. And I think this is a relatable example because progress in any industry, culture, or even family dynamics has never happened by assimilation. It has never happened by staying stagnant, and it has never happened by being quiet. It's the pot stirrers, the curiositeers, to borrow from my friend Robin Anderson. It's the storytellers. They are the ones who bring light, and they are the ones who tell us that we can do more, be better, make beautiful art, and accept more people in the universe to create this kinder, safer place for everybody. And yet, we continue to use assimilation as an expectation or a way of keeping people in their place. We hold people back when they aren't like us. And I gotta believe it's out of fear that we'll somehow lose our positions of power. But here's the thing they don't want you to know. Power is relative. Power is ever evolving. It's dangerous. And power is responsible for every disgusting thing that happens on this earth. Because power without checks and balances, without multiple perspectives, leads to corruption and it leads to abuse. There were so many gems in this episode because it really shines a light on the challenges of trying to fit in or assimilate. And as I listened back, I heard so much of the should-haves that we put on ourselves and how in that struggle we learn to protest and fight back, but not for ourselves. We focus instead on fairness or judiciousness for others. And we forget to give ourselves the same grace when we stand up for other people or speak up for other people and fight for people. We just don't do it for ourselves. Assimilation kills way more dreams than failure. And creating spaces for people to feel safe, feel seen, feel heard, and feel as if they have opportunities creates world-altering progress. But as I alluded to earlier, assimilation is not an easy concept to quote-unquote fix. I don't have the answers, but I do know that change and transformation starts with acceptance and empathy and a desire to know more about the world. It is made in the small kindnesses and our ability to see people, all people, as worthy. And maybe if we stop to admire more than the output of other cultures and other people, things like food and music and culture, and instead realize that we are all different for a reason, then maybe, just maybe, the world can be a place we're proud of. I hope you're proud of you. I hope that you're proud of your contributions to the world. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode and will listen again as we continue to explore the stories of women and girls in our communities. Until next time.